Okay, so this is an introduction, a general overview of what is Theraphi. Some people say Theraphi, like therapy, but it's how you pronounce the Greek letter phi or phi, and it's related to the golden ratio. So most people are interested in what is Theraphi. I'm going to talk about it from the perspective of my background, which is field of chemistry and chemical engineering and biomimicry. So I'm much more interested in the processes and the how it mimics nature than I am in perhaps the electrics or the technology, and I'm much better at explaining that side than the other side. If you really want to understand it from the other side, then you can watch Dan and Paul, who are the inventors, online, and they explain it really, really well. If you go to our South African website, you can see this is sort of the main page, and the real focus of the Theraphi is to help you relax, help you repair, help you recharge, and help you regenerate. And there's actually 4 elements to the Theraphi. The first element is the golden ratio of frequencies, which I'll discuss through the presentation. There's another piece which is about pulsed electromagnetic fields, which is critical, which I'll also explain. And then you have the plasma tubes, which you can see one lit up in the background there, which really a plasma is a gas which has been heated or electrified to a point where the electrons are free to move. So they behave differently than a normal gas. So that's a noble gas inside the tube that's lit up, and it creates a plasma. And then there's a Tesla coil, which I'll explain, but the Tesla coil really just increases the volts very, very high to, in this case, 500,000 volts. But the current is really low. So current is what kills you with high electricity, not voltage, so you can lie on a field of high voltage. If you go to our website, it says, what can I do for you? And the real focus is, as I said, deep relaxation, alleviating pain, rejuvenating and recharging. I'm just going to take you through each of those. The main thing about the Theraphi that everybody agrees to is it does result in deep relaxation. The first session you have is relatively short as your body's tuning to it, but in general, if you're in for a 10-minute session and then you lie in the space afterwards for another 10 to 15 minutes, you definitely notice a shift in how your stress is alleviated. I'll explain why. Some people use it for meditation because it helps your brain get really centered and calm. So people who could maybe sit for many minutes trying to calm their brain, it's easier to come out of the Theraphi and go into meditation because you find you naturally in that space. It's definitely about balancing and centering you, so helping you find your center. Some people say it helps them be more present and more aligned. We'll explain why. And some people have reached a state of joy or bliss within the Theraphi, and I have heard people say the more aligned you are, the more joy you feel. So I can see the correlation there. And then when your brain is more centered and your thinking is more clear, you actually have it's a lot easier to make decisions, have clarity in where you're going. And a lot of people say it changes the space, and I know that people have referenced it as a sacred space, and we'll also chat about why that's likely. And then there's regeneration benefits, most notable in the way it's used to treat plants. It works to create a bioactive field. So bioactive means life is more active in that field. Some people say it works on your life force, your chi or your ki. And most people who come out of it feel like their whole body's had a bit of a recharge. As they get more sessions, they really feel like their cells are revitalized. The regeneration side, we've got some really good testimonials related to that, and there's really good science to why it would be regenerative. But it's relatively new, it's only about a year or 2 old. But people who've got injuries like bashed their thumb or injured themselves in some way, you definitely notice it heals a lot faster as well. Most interesting stuff which has been done is a lot of research with just in general plasma activated water and plasma activated seeds. This is research done in the UK, and there's also a TEDx talk by someone who does it in University of Delft in the Netherlands, but there's very much evidence that plants do grow better and have a much better increase in their growth rate and their health, actually, through charging through plasma. And anyone who's ever planted seeds and then had a lightning storm notices that the seeds grow a lot faster afterwards, and lightning is plasma, so it's connected in that way. And enhancing the growth is there, but also some say that the plant's immune system is enhanced, and it's very likely that the human body's immune system is enhanced by it. And then physical relief, because of the pulsed EMF, which is quite well known, there is very much a significant result in pain reduction, whether it's acute pain or chronic pain. Reduced inflammation, because it's a compressive field, that will have a very significant result, and there are some pictures of infrared scans showing that dramatic result. People who've come out of it find that the sleep improves significantly, and because it works on your craniosacral fluid or your spinal fluid, it does have an impact on structural alignment. There's a woman who operates the Theraphi in Vancouver who had a scoliosis for a long period of life, and it was such a dramatic result that she now has a Theraphi and operates one. And eyesight, I can explain why, because it's working on the way that your eyes actually see, but in general, people who specifically place their eyes in the beam and work on their eyes, they have a good result in eyesight. And this is one of the more interesting spaces, neuroplasticity and neurogenesis, the ability for you to rewire your brain. If you've seen the work of Joe Dispenza on changing the habit of being yourself, he says the best place to do it in is if you take yourself into a deep calm state, that you go almost into a trance, and then you can rewire your brain because you're not running those circuits almost haywire. And that explains that. There's a psychotherapist in Barcelona who was at the Theraphi conference in France this year, and he now calls himself a psychotherapist. He also does family constellations and psychotherapy, and he says the role of the psychotherapist and the family constellations practitioner is to get the person into a state of what he calls a still point, so that you can do the work of what a psychotherapist needs to do in terms of addressing trauma or depression. And he says the Theraphi gets the client there a lot faster, so it's a lot easier to work with them. Also, because it brings you centered and connected, it often deals with some of the causes of depression as well. A lot of people have said noticed in addiction, because addiction is about lack of connection in general, if you look at the science now. And so if you feel more connected and more centered, that tends to shift. Definitely people giving up smoking, not interested in alcohol, but not, it's not, some people still continue, but it's if you've really got an addiction to that. And then we have people who really talk about significant changes when they go in, they leave their bodies, they have lucid dreams, and it's also all related to the fact that they're accessing the conscious field, which is another level of this, which I might not get into today. So the history of it really is, a lot of work has been done in terms of electromagnetic therapies for treating diseases or health or pain. Tesla was famous for playing with plasma and high voltage electricity, and anyone who hung around his lab noticed they felt amazing. Lakhovsky actually worked a bit with Tesla, and he then invented specific resonance coils, which activate your cells in a way that help you feel a lot better. We'll get into that. And many people know Rife. Royal Raymond Rife was famous for finding the specific frequencies of microbes and viruses and targeting those specifically, and through activating their specific frequencies, deleting them. So it's slightly different than what this field does. It creates a bioactive field where, sort of the way probiotics work, creates more healthy space. He targeted specific ones. And then we had Anton Priori in France, who's famous for having significant results in terms of cancer treatment. They could take mice and that had tumors, and they would typically die within X amount of time. When they were treated with the Priori device, they survived into the long term. And another famous French physician who treated tropical diseases took rabbits and injected them with sleeping sickness, and they'd all die within 72 hours. The rabbits that were treated through the Priori machine, they continued living. And when they took the blood out of those rabbits and put them into other rabbits, those rabbits would die within 72 hours. So it had such a dramatic impact on immunity, while the body would just fight the sleeping sickness. And the Priori machine operates on very similar frequencies, the more refined in the Theraphi, but a much higher voltage than the Theraphi is. And it was funded by the French government, and we are not allowed to use that level of high voltage as individuals. If you're a government department or I think a Department of Defense, you can't. So it's a much higher voltage, and it works much more rapidly, but it's the same idea. And then there's quite a lot of work around PMF and healing is voltage, which I'll discuss. And Robert Beck is famous for discussing how the body is electric as much as it is chemistry, because every chemical has just got polarity in it anyway if you actually get into it. The plasma history, Tesla specifically played with plasma, but more recently there's quite a lot of research. This is a TEDx talk around how they're using plasma frequency pulses to treat cancer cells quite significantly, and this is the TEDx talk from Holland about treating plants and water with plasma and significant results. So that's kind of coming through quite significantly. I mentioned the sacred space thing. There's a lot of research done around how many of the sacred spaces around the world have actually got very specific geometries to them, and those geometries set up the resonance that makes you feel like you're in a sacred space, mainly because your heart resonates in a way with it that makes you feel very connected and centered. So that's very significant in terms of this architecture. Michael Rice, who does some of the biomimicry, or I should say the golden race related architecture, works with Dan Winter behind this. I just wanted to show that picture compared to those pictures. It's a kind of famous quote from a long time ago: harmony makes things grow, lack of it makes them decay. You can imagine if you're in a space that's got very little harmonics to it, how it can actually have an impact on you in a different way compared to being in spaces that are like that, right? And then the golden ratio related to treating water and spin. The flow form is the most famous, and a lot of the biodynamic world uses it to treat water and activate water, structure it more specifically, take away its memory. And Dan Winters invented the super imploder before he did the Theraphi, which is a thing you put on the end of a hose or a pipe, and it spins the water with a very specific polarity or spin, and that actually activates it. And he also puts magnets in some of them in the super imploder. So there's a lot of research in how that actually enhances growth. But the most famous people in terms of spin, Walter Russell. If you've never heard of him, do yourself a favor and go online and watch what you can about him. He's the most extraordinary individual and significantly influenced Paul Harris, one of the inventors behind the Theraphi. And we have Victor Schoberger, who's actually the reason why I did biomimicry, studying spin and understanding how it worked to make some extraordinary technologies. And then we have Dan Winter himself and Nassim Haramein, which I'll reference later on. And then you have the biodynamic farmers in the Steiner background, who are very aware that how important vortex is to sustaining life. A lot of them poo-pooed over the years, but as the science is starting to catch up with them, they were very much on top of the game. And that's why I like Theraphi, because it's very far ahead of most of these. Essentially what the Theraphi is doing is it's creating conditions conducive to life. And anyone who knows why I'm in the field of biomimicry is I'm really passionate about finding out what makes life thrive and how do we create those conditions so that everyone can thrive. And I'm interested in it from the chemistry all the way up to the highest level of designing cities. But the reason I like this work is it's actually the fundamental core principle that everything ties together with. And it's really profound. So I'm going to start with biomimicry. The example I'm going to give you of biomimicry is an example that really has proven the work of Victor Schoberger and Dan Winter very practically. All of them have explained that the golden ratio is fundamental to enhancing spin and enhancing compression fields and bioactive fields, and it's got something extraordinary to it, and nobody really had an evidence of it in the physical. And then Jay Harmon, who's responsible for the PAX technologies, is one of the people who's very practically started to make that physically. Like when I show you the example, you'll see what I mean. But just so anyone who doesn't know what biomimicry is, bios means life, mimicry means to imitate, and it's about copying nature's processes, products, and systems to invent new technologies that work for life rather than against life. So I'm going to play a video. I think the sound is loud enough, but you can always edit it. And this is about Jay Harmon talking about his PAX technologies, which is actually going to be the thing that ties all of this information together.
Einstein said that essentially for something to exist it must be moving. So every single thing in this universe is moving. The interesting thing is that all of that movement in nature has a particular spiraling path. Nature never ever moves in a straight line, no such thing. So that is nature's streamlining principle. When I froze the whirlpool that you see in your bathtub, you pull the plug out, there's the whirlpool. If you freeze that whirlpool, it's exactly the same geometry as a hurricane or a tornado or any other spiral or cochlea of your ear. This shape is archetypal of nature. And so when I froze this, I was then able to rotate it and create. Because I had a frozen whirlpool, I was able to create a whirlpool. So one of the first things that I used it on, particularly in America, there are great big holding tanks. Well, that water gets stagnant. The municipalities that manage that water have to put chlorine and chloramines into the water. The problem is better solved by mixing that water. Generally throughout the world, if you want to mix water, it's very expensive. I put one of these frozen whirlpools in the bottom of one of these tanks, 6 inches high, 4 inches wide, and I rotated it with a couple of 100 watts of power, a couple of light bulbs of power, and I found it was able to mix an entire tank of water, 10 million gallons, which from an engineering point of view is not even conceivably possible. So from there I started adapting these shapes into fans. Fans use 18% of the world's electrical energy. They're not terribly efficient. We found time and time again we could take the best fan in the world and reduce its energy by as much as 30%. So pretty much everything in an industrial world can be improved by taking these shapes from nature and reconfiguring.
So that particular example, he talks about spinning, and I think it's 10 centimeters tall, and it spins millions of gallons of water. And how does it do that? And the research of Dan Winter actually reinforces this. But whenever something that's turning in the golden ratio feeds back and meets another thing that's on the golden ratio, the interference pattern of those waves is always constructive. Now that's extraordinary. So it's always adding and multiplying and generating an extraordinarily strong, powerful force, which is how a tornado builds up its strength, how a cyclone builds up its strength. So really important that the golden ratio is the one ratio in nature that will always have a reinforcing feedback loop and will sustain a form. When they turn off the Paxley, I think he said it would carry on mixing for 2 hours or so without even any electricity on it. It's just such a strong, powerful, reinforcing feedback loop. In fluid dynamics, the specific shape that's actually set up in those tanks, or in any tank when you spin these things, is called a donut or a torus shape, and that is the most stable flow form in fluid dynamics. So there's definitely something there. The other thing that got me in the world of biomimicry is the work of Marco Rodin. He's really on the far edge of biomimicry, but he also wound electromagnetic coils using the golden ratio as his model, and tested by Hewlett-Packard, they got 62.5% greater magnetic output. So there's also a reinforcing feedback loop happening in that in terms of output from a magnetic coil. So those two together is what made me interested. And the work of Victor Schoberger, it all seemed to be saying something more. And there's definitely something in the golden ratio that's worth paying attention to. And it seems to be a reinforcing feedback loop that is the critical thing that we need to be aware of. So the other reason I put this presentation together is put a whole lot of stuff together that if you see it as a combined set of connecting points, they all reinforce each other. Whereas if you only watched one piece about pulse EMF or another piece about golden ratio, it wouldn't be as profound as when you see all of the pieces come together. So I'm not going to do any one piece in depth, but I'm going to do each piece so that you get the big picture. And I think version 2.0 of this presentation would be deeper on each of these if people needed it. So our biggest failure is our failure to see patterns. We tend to break ourselves into silos in what we study. Some people study the cosmos, others the atoms and everything below, but each one individually. And there's very few people who study across the board. What's the similarities from the big to the small and everything in between? And there's a lot of people who are starting to do that, and the people that have seem to be the polymaths of our past and into the future, I'm sure. So it's quite well known, electrons moving freely in a bubble chamber, the universe, and even the center of a red cabbage. Very specific flow form. And in biomimicry we say nature fits form to function or flow. So the flow that is happening to build the form is the shape that the structure takes. And so really important for us to see this as evidence of the forces at work in creating these things. They're known as fractals as well. You'll see the pattern repeats from the very big to the very small, or the part has the same pattern as the big part or the whole. Fractals are really important. You will never find things in nature without fractality, and that's essential because you cannot have harmonic systems without fractality, because the part has to fit into the whole, just like a single note in music has to connect with the others. And you'll find it quite obvious if you start looking. You can see the little curl is the same as the big curl, and when they open up it's the same again. So fractal geometry was kind of studied quite a lot by Mandelbrot. What's that person's name? Mandelbrot is his name. And interestingly enough, the kind of mathematics that you have to do in order to get that, it requires you to have open systems. If you do mathematics, normally you have to assume a closed system so you can have a boundary within which to do the mathematics. But the moment you say it's an open system and the answer can feed back into itself, you start to generate fractal geometries, which are basically the patterns you find in nature. And the truth is, there is no such thing as a closed system. You cannot have a closed system. Everything is connected, whether you like it or not. So fractals are generated when you actually do the maths for open systems. And the other thing that happens is you have things called chaos theory, where you have attractors. So how does the information field generate a specific bit of information that attracts energy into those specific shapes? So that's really important, because that actually means there must be something called negative entropy. Now, that's the official scientific word, but it means that there must be something that tends towards order rather than just disorder. So all of our science says that everything moves towards disorder, and that's just the way it is. But if we have maths that can move towards order with attractors, and if we have biology that moves towards order, just your fact that your body's alive and keeps itself going is an indication of some kind of negative entropy. This is a sentence from Dan Winter's book. A universe condemned to entropy believes essentially only in death, energy systems which move only towards chaos and not towards a self-organization, which is life itself. Now, in biomimicry biology, we study self-organization as a critical step of everything. So it's a really important thing. Things that can self-organize and can go towards something rather than away, go towards order rather than away from order. You might see a single tree, when it falls down and dies, it goes towards disorder, but all those particles get reconfigured into the next plant, and that moves back to order again. So actually you have to have both entropy and negative entropy working together at all times. You cannot have one without the other. And Dan Winter talks a lot about biological negentropy, and this specific structure is how you generate negative entropy, which I'll explain a bit later. And even physics is catching up with it. They say that the information field, or the vacuum of space, is actually negative entropic, and that's what holds the entropy of the universe together. So, and the information field of space has got very similar geometries to the information field that you find in the flow forms of biology. So you can see there's the sunflower and other things. Okay, so we're going to go into biology, and I'm not going to say much about biology, just going to show you images, and you'll start to get a sense that these flow forms are evident everywhere if you actually look for them. That is a donut torus if you actually study each one of those individual dandelions. Interestingly enough, dandelion roots is really good as a healing system, and you'll find a lot of the plants that are very fractal are really good for healing as well because of their bioactive field. So you can see the shapes, even the apple. If you cut an apple in half, you see the five-sided things. Five-sided figures is how you generate the golden ratio as well. The ratio of the short part to the longer part is always the golden ratio. So 5, you could say the number 5 actually comes from 5. See five-sided blossoms, which then lead to the fruit. And then you have seed formation in these very specific geometries. So the bioactive field is very strong in the compression field in order to create a little compressed bit of DNA that is the attractor point for all of those materials to create another whole tree or another whole plant is very significant. So just being aware of that. And then this is the talk by the guy on plasma activated water, how when you actually increase the bioactive field of seeds that are normally not given much chance to grow, they're just thrown into soil and left to grow, you actually give them those formative forces, they actually grow a lot more effectively. This is us treating water in South Africa using the Theraphi and using that water to treat plants. This is 3 organic pea seeds in organic soil and fed spring water. This had no treatment. This just had the water and not the seed treated. This was the seed and normal water and fed it. So the seed activated, very, very significant. And this is just primary school kids playing with this. So it's really not hard to see the results. This is carrots. You can see the difference in how they grew. And there's a group in Swaziland who have a Theraphi, and one of the co-owners runs a essential oil plant. She actually grows rose, geranium and tea tree, and she now treats those plants in there as well. You can actually see the golden ratio and how embryos, or even how cells divide and how embryos form. There's the golden ratio all over the shape, which you can look up yourself, but anything that actually balances its sides perfectly has got golden ratio in it. And then the very thing that nourishes life, whether it's the womb inside or the egg outside, has got golden ratio all around it. What's interesting about this one particularly is that the shell itself has got a high amount of calcium, and calcium is a charge attractor. So if you've got this golden ratio reinforcing field that's going into a charge attractor which reinforces a charge field or the bioactive field, it's going to be even more significant. Which gets me to the subject of health. Would you like me to pause? I'll keep on going.
No, you're doing beautifully.
Okay. So health is really focusing on the human body. I've just explained all the sort of outside of us in nature, but let's look at the human body. We are all electrical creatures floating in the electric sea of this electric universe. You just have to look at the fractals of how our neural nets form. Even if you actually see a scan of a brain in action, it looks just like a lightning storm. It's really interesting. Lightning is plasma, very fascinating. The flow form is very evident what's going on. Even the veins, the trees, the roots, the way rivers move, really important. So the people who've done a lot of work around how our body is electric, specific work of Robert Becker, who used to study things like salamanders and how if you put a specific charge on the salamander's tail after cut it off, it grew more effectively. And he did a lot of work around enhancing bone growth in people with broken bones using electricity. And then Stan Tennant or Jerry Tennant, very famous for healing his voltage, and there's a lot of YouTube videos where you see him explaining it. But essentially, he's shown that healthy cells have a very high sort of voltage, and the more diminished the voltage of your cells is, the less likely it is to actually do its job. And he healed himself by understanding voltage. He had a real chronic illness as well. And it's really well known now. This is like researched lots and lots. You can actually find people who've looked at inflammation, edemas, actually tumor cells, cell death, in terms of what voltage there is across them. And each cell, by the fact that it's got an inside and an outside and it separates potential, is essentially a battery. That's what a battery is, right? And so really just being aware of that, I'm just placing that there. So when Tesla was playing with his voltages and doing extraordinary stuff, it led to so many people experimenting that I think in the early 1900s and late 1800s, there's a lot of people using electricity for treating disease, and they had significant results, and then it was shut down much later. But Lakhovsky did quite a bit of work, and there's very much golden ratio related work in his stuff. Priori, Dan Winters found that the frequencies that he used, if you actually use his Dan Winters equation, they're so close to golden ratio equation, which I'll explain. And then there's Royal Raymond Rife used electricity, as I said before, and there's Robert Becker. So using energy, electricity to heal is quite significant. A lot of people, as I said, come out of there saying it feels like a whole body recharge, and I'll explain why. There is a Tesla coil that's part of the Theraphi system. That Tesla coil uses 500,000 volts, and it pulses that 500,000 volts using those very specific golden ratio frequencies. So there's 2 books on pulsed EMF that I've found that really help explain why they alleviate pain, but I managed to find, and also why they're beneficial for life. Managed to find a little video that I'm going to play for you, which just says that food, water, sunshine, and oxygen are essential for life, but we've forgotten about electromagnetic pulses. I'll play a little bit of that.
Oxygen are essential for life, but there's a 5th element of health that most people don't know is essential, and that is the Earth's PEMFs, or pulsed electromagnetic fields, which is both the Schumann and the geomagnetic field, which is the magnetic field of the Earth. These frequencies and energies are so essential that NASA and the Russian space program actually equipped their spacecrafts with Schumann generators and magnetic field generators. So we need these frequencies, we need these energies for the body's circadian rhythms, energy production, and even to keep a pain-free body, which I'll explain later. But there is a twofold problem on planet Earth, which we'll explore in this video, and PEMF, as we'll find, is the solution to this problem with many benefits. And just to give you a preview of a few of the benefits that PEMF therapy has been research proven to provide, PEMF helps to eliminate pain and inflammation naturally. It will help you to get deep, rejuvenating sleep. It will increase your energy and vitality. PEMF will help you to feel younger, stronger, and more flexible. PEMF will keep your bones strong and healthy. PEMF will help your body with healing and regeneration, and it will help to improve circulation and heart health. And there's many more benefits, but those are just a few. Now I want to get right into one of the most exciting aspects of my book, which is the body-mind-earth connection.
Okay, so not
And
only
this-
the pulse EMFs have golden ratio connection and the scalar waves have EMF golden ratio connection. There's a lot of golden ratio connections to health, and this is really why the Theraphi brings them all together. Work by Dan and one of his colleagues has found that the CRANIO-SACRAL fluid, which moves through your spine, has specific waves, and people call them tides in the CRANIO-SACRAL therapy space. And if you look at those CRANIO-SACRAL therapy tidal points, if you do the equations, which I'll explain a bit later, they exactly got golden ratio relations to them, and they actually grow as a CADUCEUS, which is, that's the golden ratio as well. Similarly, it's got the biowave, which is related to your heart and your blood pressure, and these other ones related to breathing, and so they all have, we'll get into that more. But craniosacral therapy is very well known for balancing your parasympathetic nervous system. So if you go for a craniosacral therapy session, you get extremely calm in that process, and it actually, by bringing those tidal points and bringing you to the still point, you get really, really relaxed. And holistic health really is about treating not just the physical symptoms, but the mental, emotional, and other symptoms behind, other causes behind your symptoms. And one of the major ones is stress. So there's a lot of results in terms of if you just treat people's stress or their causes of their stress, they tend to get healthy and have a better immune response, or their body knows how to heal itself. If you eliminate the stress, you can get well. There's a brilliant documentary that's just coming out now, which I'll show a brief trailer for.
In today's world, the stresses are 24/7, 365. The net result is illness and disease.
90% of what takes people to the doctor is stress-related illnesses.
When you perceive a threat, in the old days we referred to that as fight or flight.
But now it's your spouse, or it's your boss, or it's rent that's due in a week. And yet the system reacts as though it's a life-threatening situation.
And if you're running a fight or flight response all the time, your immune system is compromised chronically.
We have the most money going into healthcare than any country in the world, and we have some of the worst statistics of healthcare.
Doctors and insurance companies give a drug, which then has a side effect, more toxicity, more ill health.
My body wants to be healthy, but it's the head. It's the fear. I don't know who I am without being sick. In a way, we have more faith in the power of cancer to kill us than we have faith in the power of infinite possibility.
Every organ in the human body has the ability to heal itself under the right conditions. What are those conditions? That's the question.
We are in a mindset that our body is a machine full of organs with buttons and levers that need adjusting.
Psoriasis and eczema, cause unknown. Multiple sclerosis, cause unknown. Fibromyalgia, cause unknown.
There have been radical remissions for every single cancer type. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4 lung cancer, a big brain tumor that's considered inoperable. There are examples of people out there who have healed from it. When I looked at the data, they were all using these 9. Only 2 of them are physical. The rest are mental, emotional, and spiritual.
Does this mean medicine is all negative? I go, absolutely not. Medicine does miracles with trauma.
If you have a chronic illness, believe the diagnosis, but don't believe the prognosis.
What we see here is belief itself shifts biology. That intelligence giving us life. It is the greatest healer in the world.
These symptoms are brilliantly intelligent in waking us up. Doesn't matter how long you've been sick, you can heal. And always remember that and never forget it.
So what I'm really showing that for is around the idea that addressing stress and the causes of emotional or mental related, but actually the causal level of a lot of things, you can actually enable your body to just do its job, which can heal itself. So you're creating the conditions for life to thrive, and stress is not a condition for life to thrive. So a lot of the work in holistic health therapies is around treating emotions. The more famous one is kinesiology, actually connecting to physical, structural, emotional, electrical disorders in your body and balancing those out. But particularly the work of emotions around heart is around the Heart Math Institute. And Dan Winter was involved originally around understanding the coherence necessary for your heart to be in a good emotional state. But there's a lot more that he's done since then. But essentially, they say positive emotions create physiological benefits in your body, but it's actually better to use the word coherent emotions or coherent spaces. So frustration, anxiety, worry, irritation generate that sort of frequency, whereas positive emotions, appreciation, love and care, very specific coherence to them. And they actually work with playing specific frequencies and resonating specific frequencies so that your heart rate can get more coherent and help you get more balanced, more calm, and get your emotions into a better state. Does that make sense? So really just in improving your parasympathetic space. And there's quite a lot of understanding that just playing music can deeply relax you and deeply calm you, get you into a better emotion as well. So there's very much hectically large amounts of evidence that frequency can help you get to a state of coherence. And it affects everything from your immune system to your physiological benefits to your heartbeat, etc. One way of getting the big picture behind this is that harmony creates order out of chaos, which is another fractal attractor. And there's fundamental geometrical proportions and mathematical proportions behind harmony. And anyone who's looked at the word of cymatics, you can find that different specific harmonic sounds generate very specific geometries, and you'll find that actually a lot of them match to the shapes and structures you see in nature. Like you can see the tortoise shell there. You can generate cymatics in different ways. These are cymatics generated with very specific notes that you play on the specific equipment. So it's really interesting. But in general, wherever you see matter, there's geometry. Wherever you see matter, there's definitely harmonics, and it's definitely related to the golden ratio. So matter is in itself frozen music. It's quite a famous statement. It actually comes from Egypt. The Egyptians used to say matter is frozen music, and it's getting reinforced over and over again by work of many different people. And essentially what we're trying to do is we're trying to get our heart, which is a really specific fractal geometry, it wants to beat in a very specific harmonic, to get out of its fight or flight response, and its anxiety response, which is incoherent, and get back into a state of coherence, right? And if you play very specific golden ratio frequencies back to your heart, like the 528 hertz, famous for being the love frequency, that actually helps your heart get into an extraordinary state of coherence, which is known as deep calm or deep relaxation, or even a state of bliss, joy, or love. If you actually Google that, you can find this. Just that frequency is quite famous for it. The work of Manfred Klunes in Centex said that as he measured the peaks of each emotion, people have time to do this type of thing, the emotion of love had a peak at the point which was actually the golden ratio, which is interesting merely because it makes another connection. And your heart has a big beat and a little beat and a big beat and a little beat, and the ratio of the two, the big beat to the little beat, because of the two muscles working together, actually is golden ratio related when you're in a deep state of calm and peace. Okay, you can actually even see the ratios there. And a lot of people talk about how when they're in nature they feel love, they feel biophilia, and if you put pictures of nature around a prison or around an office, the people feel great and they feel better. And there's actually quite a lot of work to find that the very specific fractality and the order that's formed out of the chaos and the harmonics that are generated there actually resonate your heart and your brainwaves into a wonderful state of calm and joy. So essentially, when I talk about the Theraphi from a biomimicry perspective, what it is doing is mimicking what nature naturally does if you spend time in it over a long period of time. But because you're bustling around in your stress state in a city, you tend to completely get disconnected from those resonant frequencies. The last piece of the puzzle is related to the brain. Brain waves, when they're in alpha and beta states, are actually got golden ratio frequencies to them. This is a work of the Resonance Foundation. A phi double spiral creates a balanced polarity field, and the double torus is the three-dimensional manifestation of that field patterning. Our brains are a perfectly designed dual torus structure that resonate with the structure of the vacuum and its energetics to allow us to both receive and send signals, and to and from the structure of space-time. So it's really just about reconnecting. Okay, if you imagine that golden ratio of frequency connected to your heart and to the cosmic, universal shapes as well, definitely there. And the last piece of the puzzle is breathing, because if you're stressed, your breathing rate changes. If you're stressed and your breathing rate changes, then your heart rate changes, your brain waves change. So a lot of people do a lot of work around breath work to help you get to center, get to calm, get to relaxed space, and specifically even to energize you. So really well known, that space. So there's this equation that Dan Winter's worked on that actually has shown that the very specific frequencies that you find for heart rate and breathing rate and craniosacral fluid and brain waves when you're in deep calm have got exact golden ratio relations. And golden ratio is the one ratio that you can always embed one within the other because it's fractal. So if you've got a heartbeat that's doing one thing, and a brainwave that's doing another thing, and a breathing rate that's doing another, and a craniosacral fluid rate that's doing another, the ability for them to stack perfectly and harmonically nest is essential, because then they're not interfering with each other. Your heart rate's not doing this and cancelling out your brainwave, and your brainwave's not doing that and cancelling out the other. They're all beating to a point where they fractally can nest together in perfect harmonics and basically find yourself completely whole. And if you imagine, you've got all the parts of you start connecting together, and it is really profound. There's a wonderful YouTube video you can watch. I think it's called Fractals, DNA and Golden Ratio, where Dan explains it in depth. But when all of these are beating together, the frequency that it generates, the resonant frequency, helps to actually braid your DNA. And he says your DNA is more like music, and it actually needs those harmonics to braid. And there's a heck of a lot of work around how your DNA is golden ratio, literally in many different ways. So really essential bit of information. But the fundamentals of it is that the Theraphi plays those specific frequencies that Dan Winter has found, pulses them in pulsed EMF with the Tesla coil with extra voltage, and you have the benefits of all of those working together to help reinforce the bioactive field or the conditions that make life thrive. And essentially really get to a state of deep relaxation, but also feeling centered and recharged at the same time. Make sense? Okay, last piece of the puzzle. You want to pause, change batteries, anything? Okay, this is the physics part, right? And the physics part really just means what's happening underneath all of that, right? So Dan Winter's equation is actually so simple, it's absurd. It actually is the equation that unifies everything in a strange way, but Nassim Haramein has done a more complex version of it. But Planck, which is the smallest scale that you can ever get down to in our understanding of the world, it's either the Planck length or time. If you multiply that by the golden ratio to the power of a whole integer, so in other words, the golden ratio to 1 or 2 or 3 or 4, never to 1.1 or 1.2, just a whole integer, every one of the frequencies that you get are exactly frequencies that support life. And so there's photosynthesis, the 2 frequencies of photosynthesis, the craniosacral fluids, the heart rate, the Schumann resonance, the ATP frequency of the cells, the radius of hydrogen. These are all like fundamental things that are the basis of life, and they all relate to this equation. I mean, it's really mind-blowing what it means, and that's what I've been showing you, how we generated those. So the very specific frequencies they've tuned into the Theraphi are actual exact numbers based on that equation. And the numbers that Priori used, the numbers that craniosacral therapists even work with, are actually these numbers. So it's really profound. And he's down mapped it from the very small all the way to the very large. The galactic year, the precession of the equinox, the Earth years, the Schumann resonance, they all have that same thing. So it's really significant information. It's really quite mind-blowing what it means. But he's one of the people who's connected all the dots. And this kind of summarizes it. The seeds of a sunflower grow in a double phi spiral, and this is exactly the same pattern that is the organizing field geometry of space-time. Really exciting, actually, in what it means. But for me, all this would be theory, and who cares? If it really does enhance our life, and it really does make a difference, then that's what we need to know it for. And the best thing about the Theraphi is a physical experience of what this means. Okay, did you have a question?
Just look at the scale a second. So it's linear, it's not logarithmic. It's a log.
Yeah, because it's just how you find a link. And if you look at Nassim Haramein's work, he says that each one of these is actually a black hole, sucking in and pushing out, and that's why there's golden ratio to that too. And it's actually, I've got another whole presentation which I've only done for school, but it's basically showing how space-time has to be fractal, because you can't have a part in a whole without it always being part of the whole, and that all of the fractality has to have very specific vector equilibriums, and the only way a vector equilibrium can move is got golden ratio and spin related to it. So it makes perfect sense. It's called cosmomimmetry, or geometry of the cosmos. So the famous statement of the alchemist, as above so below, I've already done the as within so without. So if it works at that level, it must work right inside the cell. And as a chemical engineer, this part is where it comes together for me, because if you get the chemistry right, everything that builds up from that way onwards is going to be life friendly, and that's what I love. If you get the physics right, that all makes sense. So there's actually 2 interacting spirals that form a donut. So the one is like one part of what the Paxili would generate, and then that would interfere and create another one. Those 2 interacting fields create this torus, which is like a heat pump with suction and explosion, implosion, explosion at the same time. And that shape is actually dependent on two critical things: that the compressive field of suction or implosion is cooling and regenerative and formative and makes order out of chaos, and the explosion field, which is heating and destructive, creates chaos out of order. Those two work together. It's the yin and the yang that everyone discusses. We tend to only work in our understanding of science that this exists, and the Newtonian science, it's changed significantly, but we haven't really caught up. And most of our technology only functions there. Our energy is pulled apart, it's not put back together again, all of that sort of thing. So the kind of fusion world is looking for that. So to have these two fields interacting and generating this, you with the suction feeding the explosion, the suction feeding the implosion feeding the explosion. And the implosive force is the formative bioactive field, and the way you generate it is when two golden ratio related basically vortices interact in the center, and Dan calls them pine cones kissing noses, and those waves phase lock or phase conjugate, and has a massive reinforcing feedback loop, which is called a suction field, which actually Dan goes to describe as actually the cause of gravity, which Nassim Haramein says is the black hole that is part of the white hole. And the sun, you're outside the event horizon, so you see it as a sun. A black hole, you're inside of the event horizon. And actually, if you look at the work of Kesh, he talks about it as everything being a plasma, and that's also got a Coulomb barrier, which is the end point. And if you look at physics now in the quantum world, they're really proving that all that exists actually is energy, and motion is all there is. The only definition of a matter is something that has mass and inertia. And because E equals mc squared, everything has mass, because everything has energy, and because everything is in spin, it's got inertia. So there is no such thing as matter. There is only energy that's forming a PHI-CYCLE, where the word physical comes from. So the physics says that everything comes from the 0-point energy field. The 0-point energy field generates the physical universe. And this picture of a magnet is one of the things that really blew my mind, that the magnet is not generating the magnetic field. The magnetic field is generating the magnet. You've got to totally switch your brain around and understand that. And the human body's got the same. This is a photon from the University of Michigan, this thing here, which basically, for a light to be both a wave and a particle, it has to interfere with itself and generate a part I call, or particle, and that is what a photon would look like. Just an energetic fluid flow form that actually is a stable flow form that has the illusion of a part in the whole, which is a part, or a packet of energy. You can imagine the force that a little tornado of energy has, right? So we've always said there's the dual nature of light, it's both a wave and a particle. You can now understand how. The wave is interfered with through observation or measurement, can have a reinforcing feedback loop, and you end up with something like that, right? So really, it's now even proven at the level of the universe. People in the world of Oxford University Department of Physics, Professor Joseph Silk, says if we assume that the universe is not just started from one big bang and going off into entropy, if you assume that there's a cycle of birth and death, then the donut torus shape perfectly explains and models this behavior. And then you have Nassim Haramein's work, and literally you could spend an entire year studying Nassim Haramein's work. I have done it through the Resonance Academy. But essentially all of them are looking at the same thing in different ways, right? This is the donut flow form, this is the cymatics, and this is the sacred geometry or the vector equilibrium. All of them is the same thing, but just looking at it from a different angle. These are when you put lines at the end of points there, and this is when you just allow the flow to move, and this is when you're looking at it from above and seeing the results of the movement. If you look at those shapes, those shapes are known as the Platonic solids. Those are really just about putting edges to spinning vortices. I'll explain that right now. But all the Platonic solids have golden ratio in them. If you take a donut and you put planks on the edge of each donut, right? So you can imagine that would be one plank. You can't stack a spinning vortex like a tornado and put another one at that angle. They would destabilize each other. But if you put one exactly across the middle, the two gyroscopes would balance each other out and they wouldn't interfere. Does that make sense? So what Dan's worked out is you can only stack donuts in very specific geometries, which are in fact the Platonic solids. And he's also worked out that if you took that as a dual electron, because electrons always exist in pairs, that would mean that every atom is formed by stacking donuts together of double electrons. Now, that sounds crazy, but what really matters is that if you look at the electron shell model that we have today, you can only have very specific numbers of electrons in each cell. And each number is 2, 6, 10, and 14. Nobody's ever explained those numbers. But if you look at them as how these specific shapes stack together, that perfectly explains the 2, 6, 10, and 14. So it's the only model that really explains how an atom actually forms from the bottom all the way up from electrons. And people who look at this therefore say the whole periodic table could be reset, because the only difference between each element on the periodic table is how many protons, neutrons, or electrons it has. The protons and neutrons have got something to do with the implosive force. The electrons got more to do with the explosive force. But literally you could restack the entire periodic table around these specific geometries and therefore be able to understand what their frequencies are as well. But this is my favorite one. If you put it like this in octaves, the noble gases, which are the perfect dodecahedron platonic solids, are the center, the still quiet, unreactive gases in the center, like the center of a tornado, and all the others are more and more reactive as you get further away from them. So it makes a lot more sense. And this ties back to the plasma tubes of the Theraphi, because the plasma tubes of the Theraphi are actually lit up with the noble gases, which are in fact the calm center of the scent. So you've got you can see the color is a mixture of, they say it's a mixture of 3 of these, but they haven't said which 3 of these. And really to sum it all up, Walter Russell says all of existence is formed from interrelated spirals or vortices that radiate out or explode and draw in or implode simultaneously and infinitely. And the force of gravity is actually perfectly balanced with the force of radiation, force of inflammation with compression, explosion, implosion. You can keep going with this, and it's the yin-yang idea. And there is a lot of work on dance to show exactly why it's the force of gravity that is the suction in the center. And you can actually do the equations from Nassim Haramein, and he'll solve that it's the black hole equation will solve for gravity. So gravity is actually the resulting force of the rapidly speeding up center of these things, which, I mean, it's really impressive. One thing worth noting is that some people who lie in the Theraphi feel a weight come onto them, like a heaviness come onto them, as if they're held in place and they know where they are. And that might be related to the fact that the scalar forces are generating that sort of gravity field.
Can I stop you there? Can I ask you a question on this one?
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah. So, looking at the reinforcing cycle, they said it can be additive or multiplicative. Can you just
it basically accelerates then. So instead of it just being the momentum gets added and multiplied at the same time. So it forms a dramatic, like imagine exponential technology, exponential force of extreme speed, so that it takes that translation of vorticity from transverse into longitudinal and it just adds and multiplies, It's like how a tornado forms, if you imagine it, just always reinforcing through.
Why are you adding 2?
You're going to have to ask me on another moment, because right now that's...
Sorry, that's okay.
If you, I can give you... Yeah, you just look on the book as well. But essentially what Dan and Paul have done is they've basically taken these 2 vortices with the plasma tube, put them in the center, you lie in the middle, and you're essentially in the middle of this extraordinary phase-conjugated bioactive negative entropic field. And it's harmonizing your heart, brain, everything into that state. This is an image from somebody's website. I think it actually moves. One of the Theraphi websites uses that. You're actually lying in the middle of that phase conjugate field, which I call the pulse of life. Right, so the Theraphi components, it's slightly changed. These 2 have been merged into one. You've got your 2 tubes, which are now even changed their shape into a golden ratio shape. You've got the Tesla coil, and you've got this amplifier which plays all those frequencies, specific exact frequencies as per his equation of the Schumann resonance, the everything, your CRANIO-SACRAL fluid, your heart rate, your brain waves, the earthia, the everything. So you're basically getting majorly reconnected, and all of your physiological systems are getting synchronized and harmonized. So you can see the shape now has also got a very specific geometry, and in the Theraphi conference in France this year, they slowed this down really slow on a video, and they showed you can actually see the tornado forming in the center. There's such precise technologies, and to get this glass shaped in this exact ratio, and to have those angles, and to get the spin, and to have the voltage, I mean, essentially what it is, it's the combination of the best technologies that people know for healing and for creating conditions conducive to life put into one. The only difference they said they might do in the future is dramatically increase the voltage even further than the 500,000 volts. So really the best place to go for the in-depth understanding of what these are is to Dan Winter. There's a lot of videos with him describing it. Hopefully with this brief background understanding of what biological negentropic fields and phase conjugation, he uses those words a lot, you'll understand him a lot more. A lot of people say his language is quite hard for them to understand. And then we have Paul Harris, who took his pure equations and his pure understanding and managed to actually build stuff with it. And Paul Harris is sort of famous for his alchemy understanding, and he actually works with plants in extracting different components of them. He's an extraordinary individual, explains this really beautifully if you watch his videos. But he has been working on Rife technologies and other technology, Tesla technologies, for so long. He hand winds the coils, he designed these and got them built specifically. When you order a Theraphi, it takes 5 months to come because they're literally hand built from scratch by the inventor and his friends. So really profound work that they've done. And you can use it to specifically treat ailments like your knees or eyes, or you can use it for a whole body treatment. And mostly this is enough. And if you come for a treatment and you lie in the field, just by the fact your cells are getting the highest voltage they could possibly get to in terms of reinforcing their health, your body's getting its stretched, dealt with. What tends to happen is it sort of peels you like an onion. And sometimes you have emotional work done on you and your body just starts to release stuff. Sometimes you go home and dream and it just heals issues from your past that you didn't even know you had. You feel connected, you feel calmer. The very obvious results are people with pain. They come in with pain that's acute or chronic, and it big result. It also, because it structures water, it structures your blood, so it changes the pH and makes your body more alkaline. So people with arthritis have significant results. My mother has actually reversed her arthritis from using it consistently. And things like a bruise or inflammation tends to have quite a dramatic result. It tends to heal really fast. So you can see those things are big obvious ones. But most of all, it's just extraordinary what it does for your state of stress and state of relaxation. I will continue to let you know more about the testimonials after I finish, because there's lots of them and you ask me lots of questions. But just to end the pure content, you can find out more on our website. You can email us for more information. And at the moment, South Africa has more Theraphies than any other country in the world. This isn't showing you another three that are in South Africa, but one guy has 2, and one he uses privately, and the other one he hasn't decided what he's doing with. The other person has hers for private use, and she hasn't decided what she's doing with that yet. So there's a lot, and it's quite amazing. And the Cape Town one is relatively new. The one in Somerset West has arrived at the same week as the Cape Town one. We will have one in the KwaZulu-Natal Midlands in the next month. But the one in Johannesburg's been operating the longest. Swaziland the next longest, and Knysna the next longest. And I just received some amazing testimonials from Knysna, which I'll read for you just now. But essentially that's the end of the